time right now for so many reasons. But we're also going to normalize being emotional about this discussion today. My name is Alberto Olivas. I'm director of the Congressman Ed Pastor Center for Politics and Public Service. Here at ASU, we're part of the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions. And it's really my honor to head up this center named after such an incredible leader. If you're not familiar, we always talk about Ed Pastor because his story is important. Ed Pastor was not just the first Latino elected from Arizona to serve in the United States Congress. He was someone that came from relative obscurity, a very humble background from a mining town called Claypool in the Globe, Miami area. So a small rural part of our state. A gentleman with, he was a chemistry high school teacher before he ended up serving in Congress. So it's important for our students and our community to know his story. How did someone from such a humble background, without a lot of resources, without powerful connections, how did he get to serve in Congress and become, within a short amount of time, one of the, no exaggeration, one of the most influential and important members of Congress in the time that he served in our nation's capital. And a lot of that story is about building bridges to communities to work together on issues of common concern. Growing up, I saw him as a real hero for the Latino community. It wasn't until I started the center in his name here at ASU that I started going to DC and hearing from a lot of Republicans that served with him in Congress that missed him just as much as Democrats did. And so I really got to see him as not just an important leader for Hispanics, not just an important leader for Democrats, but really an important leader for our state and our nation, as living the example of leadership through bridge building and through trust building. He was someone that Republicans and Democrats alike felt they needed to have on their side to move forward with the really big, important issues. And we think that's just such an important lesson for everyone to learn about what it takes to make lasting change happen. So we created the center here at ASU 9 years ago and are trying through events like today's event to embody his legacy because, among other things, a high priority for Congressman Pastor was to focus on who is not at the table and when important decisions are being made, whose voices are not being heard and represented in the halls of power. And one of the most important things he did as a congressman, besides any of the bills that he had a hand in, was bringing people to the table, encouraging young people, encouraging women, encouraging minorities, and being a champion for people with disabilities to say, there's a role for you to play in advocacy. There's a role, an important need that you can fulfill by showing up at meetings, by bringing your stories to the forefront to be considered, to be weighed, by bringing your stories into play when policy is being developed. So he was really, I think he'd be overjoyed that we're doing events like today's event to help shine a light on those voices that are underrepresented and to encourage more people to step into that advocacy space. So today's event is part of a series of events called Diversifying Political Engagement that we started 2 years ago to really identify what are the barriers, what are the obstacles that different communities face when it comes to civic participation, when it comes to having a political voice, and what are solutions and resources to help overcome those barriers. Obviously, today's focus is on people with disabilities. This is the second year that we're having this conversation, and we're just so honored and pleased to have such an amazing and impressive panel that bring many different perspectives on that question to bear for our conversation today. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to our program manager here at the Ed Pastor Center, Tiffany Thornhill, who will serve as your moderator, and she will take it from there. So thank you very much, Tiffany, for organizing the incredible amount of work it took to organize today's event. We're really excited for our conversation, and thanks everyone that's joining us as participants to let you know how you can participate with your own questions as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Alberto. And first, I want to apologize. There's some conversations going on in the question and answer portion, and we apologize. We did request cart services for this event. We were expecting our cart service provider to be here today, and due to circumstances out of the Pastor Center's control, we do not have our cart service provider here at the moment. We do have ASL interpretation here, and we also have closed captioning in the Zoom setting. But please do accept our sincerest apology for the mishap, for the misunderstanding, and the confusion with the technology and the cart service provider today. We fully intended to have that service here for our participants in this webinar, and we truly do apologize for the situation that is out of our hands at this time. So if those of you who do need the cart services and appreciate cart services, we truly do apologize, and we are grateful that you are here spending this time with us. And if we are not able to serve your needs at this time, we truly do apologize, and we will do our best to do better next time. Also, I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, all of our panelists, all of our attendees. Thank you to everybody who is watching the replay on YouTube as well. We thank you for taking the time to participate in this webinar today. So now that we have taken the time to get that out of the way, we will go ahead and start. So as Alberto mentioned, we will start with a poem. And this one might get us in the feels too. So it wasn't my plan to have us feeling all the feelings this morning, but if that's what is going to happen, then hey, let's welcome it. So let me get started. This poem is called A Better World by Stevie Wills. A better world for all, a world where all is accessible for all people. What may be called a tall call would benefit all. A world where people with disabilities have opportunities to fully participate in their communities. Enabling all to make contribution benefits all. This is a better world for all, a world where a people dwell in equity, perceived with dignity, engulfed from reality, the reality I bring to light, a spotlight on the plight of people with a disability. Living in poverty, facing barriers to equity within their community, to full participation, education, occupation, medical intervention, vaccination, sanitation, thus the situation. People with a disability more likely to live in poverty, and people living in poverty have less access to medical intervention, vaccination, vital public information, nutrition, sanitation, and this increases the risk of illness, infection, of the acquisition of a disability. Thus, people in poverty more likely to live with a disability, and people with a disability more likely to live in poverty. This the situation, a persistent, unfair cycle of poverty and disability. A better world for all. Let us build, reducing barriers, removing barriers, build the inaccessible physical into the accessible physical. Remove each barrier to wheelchair access, provision of variations in forms of communication. But more insurmountable than stairs are prejudiced stairs. Rearrange the interior, the densest of barriers, attitude. What we conclude about disability will eventuate in how we relate to people with disabilities and their families. It's time for an interlude. Check attitude, slide under microscope to be reviewed. For attitudes prelude what it means to include or exclude. A better world for all. Let us build. For this is the call. Benefits all. All right. Well, now that the ground is set and the floor is ready, we will get started with our conversation. But I just want to, as the poem said, remind us that this world is for all of us. And the way that we nurture and support the world to be for all of us is in these conversations and in these discussions. So I'm grateful and hopeful that we will talk about some things that may be uncomfortable. It may make folks feel uncomfortable, but change happens in those uncomfortable spaces. So Without further ado, let us go ahead and get started. Um, excuse me. Let's go ahead and start with our introductions. My name's Tiffany. I am the program manager here in the Pasteur Center for Politics and Public Service here at Arizona State University. I am a social worker and a public administrator. I'm a parent, and I am one who cares about humanity. So I'm grateful to be your moderator today for this conversation. I will just go around the room and call on folks to go ahead and introduce themselves, our panelists here. So we'll start with Ronaldo.
Hi, I'm Ronaldo Fowler. I'm a senior staff advocate with Disability Rights Arizona, and I coordinate our protection and voter access program at Disability Rights Arizona. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ronaldo. David?
Yes, my name is David Carey. I'm a disability justice educator at Arizona Statewide Independent Living Council.
Thank you for being here, David. Melanie?
Hi, I am Melanie Mills. I am the state director for the ARC of Arizona, and we provide supports and services to individuals with intellectual developmental disabilities throughout their entire lifespan.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Sai?
Hey everyone, my name is Sai In. I'm a staff attorney with Disability Rights Arizona. DRAZ is the protection and advocacy system for the state of Arizona. So we're federally mandated and we're here to help people with disabilities.
Thank you for being here, Sai. Nikki?
Yes, hello. My name is Nikki Suka, and I'm the Director of Public Policy and Community Relations at the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, ACDHH.
George, are you there?
Yes, my name is George Garcia, and I am Executive Director of Southwest Institute for Families and Children, where we support people with disabilities through empowerment, advocacy, and knowledge.
Thank you, George, for being here. And Jordan.
Hey everybody, my name is Jordan Moon. I am the first vice president of the National Federation of the Blind of Arizona, which is the National Federation of the Blind is the largest consumer advocacy group of blind people in the country. I'm also the director of the Phoenix Center of Savvy Services for the Blind, which is a nonprofit local Arizona training center that serves to provide blind people with skills training.
Thank you so much for being here, Jordan. All right, we also have American Sign Language interpreters in the room as well, who will be here interpreting for those who are fluent in ASL. So thank you so much for our interpreters for being here also. All right, well, let's jump right into our questions. Question number 1. Are you aware of any challenges the disability community experiences related to working on or volunteering on campaigns, running for office, attending public meetings, engaging with elected officials, and community organizing around social issues? So for this first question, I will throw it to David.
Well, thanks, Tiffany, for that question. I appreciate it. First, I'd like to say Congressman Pastor was very instrumental in the light rail station at 50th Street in Washington. So I had a chance to meet him once, and I know he had a lot to do with getting funding for that station. So I definitely was a giant when it came to providing getting funds for this light rail stop. But with that said, it's a great question. So there's quite a few things when it comes to those being engaged in the process, as well as those that may want to run for office. So it ranges from accessibility to social barriers to awareness training. So, for example, some of the biggest problems is campaign offices, for example, the physical barriers. Campaign offices, meeting venues, polling places may not be fully accessible to individuals with mobility impairments. But then you have transportation factor. So lack of transportation options that can hinder attendance to meetings, rallies, or the events. But then you have communication issues. So, for example, the website, public meetings, they may not have the appropriate, sign language interpreters or Braille documents or whatever someone may need to be fully engaged in the process. But then when it comes to for example, another example is information access. So, for example, campaigns and public information may not be available in accessible formats such as screen reader, uh, friendly devices. But then you have the complex language. Things may not be in plain language. So individuals who have cognitive disabilities may not be able to understand. But another factor is economic barriers. So volunteering or running for office uh, requires financial investment, which can be challenging for someone, especially who is on disability, who's disabled and have Social Security or lack of funds. And then time constraints. When you have a disability that's managing your health can be quite a burden itself, and so it's sometimes making that time commitment can be very difficult to do so, and managing your health at the same time. Another example is social barriers. So, for example, a lot of campaigns may not be familiar with people with disabilities, and so they may not reach out to that community, and so they seem to be left out. Lack of representation. That many people may want run for leadership or are discouraged from getting involved, which by them not being involved in the process or being in its lack of representation. And so that's another issue. Another thing is I want to say complex uh, um, bureaucratic hurdles. So, for example, some administrative processes that it takes to run a campaign or get involved in a campaign is quite challenging. And I got a couple more things I would say. I think health and safety concerns. So, for example, someone participating in public events uh, may be difficult for someone, especially in this time right now. We have COVID and other viruses going around. If they have health issues, that may lend them from want to be around large crowds. I know myself, for example, who have a disability, I would not want to be or feel comfortable in large convention settings with a lot of people. And so that, hinders my ability to fully engage in the process. Another thing I'm going to say is awareness and training. So, for example, I think I kind of touched on this earlier, that a lot of campaigns and staff are not very familiar with people with disabilities. So that process is kind of left out of the process. And anyway, but those come as some of the things I can think of when it comes to be either volunteering in the process or running for office. I definitely think we definitely do need more representation. And I definitely feel that people with disabilities should get more involved in the process. I know we're going to kind of touch on that a little later on, but I think if we have more people with disabilities, we may have a little bit better outcomes as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those comments, David. I'm sorry, I lost my notes over here. Was there someone else who wanted to contribute to the question? I believe that was Nikki who had some comments to add to this one as well.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Tiffany. And I did want to comment on that on behalf of Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. We serve over 1.6 million people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf blind, and the people in our community. So for deafblind specifically are people who have hearing and vision loss. And we serve the entire state of Arizona. So as far as those communities, deaf, hard of hearing, and combined vision and hearing loss, those populations have a variety of different needs, and they have a variety of methods of accessing communication. So I wanted to just back up a little bit. So the range of disabilities, it really is a spectrum. There's a great diversity in the needs, whether it be cognitive, physical, developmental, could be mental health issues. There are just so many different types of disabilities. And so there are so many ways to look at services or how to work with people who have disabilities. And there's just a myriad of needs for the community as a whole. And so the bottom line is, how can we all have access to this space? And how can we have that access just like anyone else in the community, someone who doesn't have a disability? And how can we have equitable access to information? How can we have equal access to providing our thoughts in the process, sharing our resources, and making connections with people who have different experiences in the world? So that's why coming here, especially coming here and getting involved with the political process, a lot of people want to be involved, but they aren't always provided with the opportunities to do so. And I'll give you some examples. So for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing community, I often meet with elected officials. So I, as a deaf person, would set up a meeting with an elected official. And in doing so, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, does this person know that they need to provide an interpreter or a cart captioner? Does that elected official know how to provide accommodations for someone who is deaf blind, for example, a support service provider? So support service provider is going to guide them to the places that they need to be. So there are a variety of things to keep in mind. And when we're talking about elected officials and how can they should be asking, how can I best communicate with you? How can I best make this meeting with you accessible? And starting that conversation is really the challenge. Another example that I can give you is, suppose I want to go to my local district. And perhaps there's the legislature is in session, and I want to go, but there's no interpreters there. There's no captioning there in that session. So again, it comes back to communication access, and is it being provided? And I'll give you another example that actually happened about 2 years ago. There was a deaf person who wanted to get involved as a poll worker. And the county did not want to provide an interpreter. They were going to provide an interpreter for training, And then our agency actually ended up getting involved in this process, that we had to get involved to make sure that it was accessible. But again, the challenges that exist for the people in our community who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind, in the categories of disability, these are subgroups, but yes, there are challenges that exist in these areas of civic engagement. And so it's important to share our experiences so that everyone can have a better understanding of the needs that we have, and so that we can have equitable access to communication and information in the world around us.
Thank you so much for that response, Nikki, and further making me feel bad that the cart provider is not here today. I am so sorry, y'all. I promise you, I'm feeling so bad over here that the cart service provider what did not show up for us. So again, our sincere apologies, because access is important. We need access, and yes, it's important. So we apologize again. Thank you so much for that response, Nikki. And I think Jordan had some comments for this question as well.
Yeah, and I'll be brief because both answers were spot on. So what I will say is, as someone who's blind, just kind of what was alluded to, a lot of people really want people with disabilities to be involved, but get extremely nervous about how they're going to interact with them. So I can tell you personal stories about myself, how I'm not going to say which party, but was going to help out with the phone bank. And when I went to the office to sign up, they were really confused on me as a blind person, how I would be able to do it. It took a lot of internal advocating for me to speak up for myself. And unfortunately, a lot of people with disabilities are going to have to kind of just find it within themselves to advocate when there is not an easy solution in order. And because of that extra burden and extra kind of pressure that's put on people with disabilities, I think that prevents a lot of them from even trying to get involved on the organizing roots level in the first place. I also think, last thing I'll say about this is, it is absolutely essential that we as disability leaders encourage ourselves as people with disabilities to continue to run for office. We do not have very many of us with disabilities representing, representing and holding those public office positions, whatever the case, whatever the office is. I don't care if it's a school board position. We had Representative Jennifer London here in Arizona, who was great and recently left, I believe. So, there is really no example of our voice being represented or heard on that level. And I think once that happens, and if we can get people with disabilities in the public office, it's going to trickle down to the organized grassroots effort.
Yeah, thank you so much for that response and for touching on that organizing grassroots effort conversation part of the question. So thank you so much, everyone, for contributing to that question. Is there any follow-up remarks before we move on?
Tiffany, this is Ronaldo with Disability Rights. One of the things that we have worked real hard with the Arizona Disability Voter Coalition group for a number of years, probably for the last 8 years plus years, is really trying to change. We have laws in place. So, but one of the things that we see is challenges in terms of cultural changes and social changes and having expectations from getting full access to the electoral process. And so those are some of the challenges, as Jordan mentioned, is people being uncomfortable. They don't know what to do. Or you have laws that tell you what you're supposed to do. So when we look at this process, laws are part of it, but it's also changing the social fabric, making sure they're inclusive with voters with disabilities. As Nikki mentioned, there are so many different accommodations that are needed depending on the person themselves. And so a lot of times they have a standard tray of, here's what we do. for persons with disabilities. So it's really trying to change that culture in terms of for election officials, for volunteers, for campaigns. And so I just want to bring that up, say that this is an ongoing work that we're working on, and it's going to take time to really make that ship move in the right direction, but it's moving slowly. I think maybe too slow for some of us.
That's the bureaucratic process for you, ain't it? All right, so we will move on to our next question, and that will be, what are your thoughts about civil rights and adult guardianship and the recent Arizona law regarding supportive decision making? So we'll have Sai kick us off with this one.
Yeah, definitely. So, for those who might not know, historically in Arizona, if a person was placed under a full or plenary guardianship, that individual automatically became disenfranchised. There was no further inquiry into whether they had capacity to vote or whether they understood what the process was like. So their fundamental right was just automatically taken away. Limited guardianship was a little bit different. Limited guardianship, with that, the individual could retain the right to vote, but it was up to that individual who was subject to the limited guardianship to show that they had capacity to vote. So recently, there was a Court of Appeals opinion that challenged the constitutionality of the Arizona statutes as it relates to guardianship and voting. So that change is if a person is petitioned for full guardianship and a full guardianship disordered, that individual isn't automatically disenfranchised anymore. The court must hold a separate hearing to determine whether the individual has capacity to vote. And the court provided additional guidance as to what sufficient capacity means. And I'm just going to briefly read from the court's decision. The court stated, under the ordinary and commonly understood meaning of these words, a person retains sufficient understanding to exercise the right to vote under the guardianship statutes if that person has enough comprehension to know that he or she is expressing a preference on a ballot for a particular candidate for political office or against a policy measure. So this is great news for people who are subject to guardianship or who could possibly be under guardianship right now. So this case decision was recently new. It was handed down to us on May 30th, 2024. So very fresh. And we don't know the potential ramifications of it right now, but definitely stay tuned to our social media pages because we'll provide updates as to what it means for people with disabilities. But it is great news that the court recognized that the statutes historically were unconstitutional because they did not have the separate hearing before. So as all of this relates to supported decision making was recently passed into law in 2023. It received unanimous support by both the Senate and the House, which is great news. And it provides people with disabilities an opportunity to form a team of supporters. So I'm going to let the experts talk a little bit more about this. So I'll pass this on to George and Melanie to really dive into how supported decision-making plays into guardianship and voting generally.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, one thing that I did want to add about supported decision making, as I said, is is that it really does give more independence to people with disabilities. When working with families to determine what they understood about guardianship and supported decision making, is that people really didn't understand what guardianship truly implied, or what was the implications of having guardianship for their family members, and understanding that it really took away all of their rights, including their rights to vote. And furthermore, it sort of decreased the incentive to be independent. When you have a guardian making all decisions for you, the person with a disability would say, well, what's the point of learning to take care of myself when somebody's going to be making decisions for me anyway? Supported decision making has been a real game changer because, one, it gives families an alternative, a less restrictive alternative to guardianship. It allows people to say, hey, I can still maintain my independence, still keep my rights, if I have the right supports to help me make decisions for myself. So supported decision making has increased the independence of people with disabilities, has allowed people with disabilities to keep their rights, including their rights to vote, and really allowed them to have a stake in the decisions that are made for themselves, whether it's personal decisions or even in the electoral process.
Yeah, and I can just add to that, one of the key components of supported decision making and it becoming law is allowing individuals to find supporters that they trust to provide them with unbiased, accurate information, but also being able to, especially in the intellectual disability community, be able to present that information in a way that they can understand it. When we read the laws that are being proposed or we read these platforms, sometimes it's really difficult to understand the issues that are being presented in front of you. And so for somebody who has a cognitive challenge, that can be even more emphasized. And so it's important that the supporter understands their role and that they are there to provide that unbiased information and to make sure that the information is accurate and to the level of understanding for the individual. And so, the trainings that we've been providing collectively within the disability community, we're really focusing on, finding that person that can support you in the most appropriate way, creating those formal relationships and having that legal document. So when you do decide to go to the polling stations and you have that supporter with you, you're able to present that document to the poll workers and let them know that this is an accommodation that you are seeking, to have that supporter there to help explain the process to you and help guide you through that process.
Thank you so much for all of your contributions to that question. For those of you who answered and for the other panelists who might be in the room, a follow-up question to that would be, in your experience and in your working environments, what subpopulation of the disability community is most impacted and affected by guardianship? Can anyone answer that?
I see three different populations that are potentially subject. So as Melanie talked about, so folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities are impacted. There's a growing issue, not a growing, but a pervasive issue in schools that a lot of parents who have school-age children, they get a lot of information from their teachers, from their SPED coordinators about rights information, and there's something called the School to Guardianship Pipeline. The National Council on Disabilities, which is a federal agency that advises stakeholders and the president, coined this term. And the issue is that schools are not providing the wide array of alternatives and complements to guardianship. So maybe like a power of attorney arrangement would be better, maybe a delegation of education rights so that the student can have mom and dad still be a part of the decisions if they turn 18 as a right. So so that is one population that is that could be affected by this. And the second population are those individuals experiencing mental health issues or mental illness. These individuals, because of their disability, they're unable to communicate responsible decisions concerning themselves. And because they have a history of mental illness, and because their mental illness, it could be untreated, it could be just very pervasive in their healthcare. Courts have determined that they might need a guardianship. A third community is folks who develop Alzheimer's or dementia. So these individuals are generally reviewed by a neurologist, and the neurologist will make assessments as to whether they have capacity. And in some cases, a healthcare provider may send a report to APS noting or recommending a guardianship. In all those cases, there are no blanket rules. You have to look at the individual on an individualized basis. You have to determine what their strengths are and where they need support with. And that's where supported decision-making can come into play. Supported decision-making can build that gap and help people with disabilities still maintain autonomy and self-determination, but they just form a team of supporters to help them out.
And just to kind of add on to what Cyan was saying, you know, we have been working with a family that experienced that encouragement during high school to seek guardianship of their child. And so they did, thinking that their child didn't have the capacity to understand decision making. And then a year ago, they finally found a communication device that worked for her, and then realized quickly that she understood everything that was being talked around her, that she had learned decision-making skills. And now they're going through the process of trying to reverse guardianship. And that is extremely difficult, and it is extremely costly for the family to now go through that process. And what we see typically is that, you know, there could also be a delay in maturity for individuals where somebody might gain those decision-making skills in their mid to late 20s. And now they're under guardianship and they're trying to exercise that more independence that hasn't been afforded to them. And so it can, again, put the family in a situation where they are trying to reverse that guardianship. And it is, again, extremely difficult and expensive.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for contributing to that question. It's I really appreciate exposing the community and exposing the different subpopulations within the community that are impacted by this, and then sharing those other alternatives to preserving the civil rights of those who might be experiencing those things that were talked about. So thank you so much for that discussion. Let's move on to the next question. So the next question is, do you have any insight into civic engagement and voting resources for youth within the disability community? Are there any specific barriers and challenges? So this question I'm going to throw to both Nikki and Ronaldo.
Okay, great. I wasn't sure if Ronaldo would go first, but I'll go ahead and start. So related with the youth, how important is it to have them involved in this process, right? So going back to talking about the point I made earlier, which is that information accessible? And just to kind of set this up, over 90% of children who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, are born to parents who have normal hearing abilities. So those parents more than likely have never even met someone who is deaf before. So they're suddenly presented with this challenge of how do I communicate with my own child? And so that's one thing to consider, that these children who are born into hearing families, are they getting access to not only communication at home, but some of that incidental learning that happens, information acquired about politics, the political system, civics, all of those things that are typically acquired at home, are they being exposed to that? And then additionally, in the school system, are they being provided with that basic information in the school system? Are the films that they're watching, are they captioned so they have access to that material? Are there written materials that are in direct and simple language for them to understand? So all of these things are important to consider if our children have access to the information that they need to be involved. And a lot of times there's a question in the youth of, why should I get involved? Why is this important to me? And so that's one thing that has to be addressed in the youth, and getting them involved, letting their voice out and showing them that it is important to have their voice heard. And at ACDHH, we have partnered with the Clean Elections, the Clean Elections Commission here in Arizona. And I'll talk about that more in an upcoming question about our partnership with them, with the Clean Elections. But the Clean Elections this year, they have done, it's called the Superhero Captain Activate is the name of this cartoon that they've created. And it's trying to kind of capture the attention and pull in the youth into getting involved in elections. And there are a variety of resources as well, specifically for children and the youth. And so that's a good resource to start with. And as an agency, we also plan to develop materials in the future that are specifically aimed at our community's deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind youth in particular.
Okay. So what I want to talk about is, when we talk about youth and getting them ready to vote and participate in this process, one of the things we want to do is, first we want to talk with that young person themselves about their right to vote, expectations as an adult. But one of the things that, excuse me, families a lot of times set the expectations for that young person with the disabilities. As you heard earlier, as Cy mentioned, it talked about moving to the guardianship line. So much of that information is driven by families that may not know what resources that are available out there. So that's one of the things that we do at Disability Rights. We have a legal option manual, as I mentioned earlier, what options are out there other than guardianship to provide the families, because the families don't know. And one of the things with students in the school system, sometimes, and just speak in general, there's a fairly low expectations for students with disabilities. So it's changing that whole culture of expectations for students with disabilities. As being an adult, transitioning from school to adulthood, voting, participating. So introduce voting into the civic engagement conversation with them while they're in school, like all other students. They receive that information about voting. Students with special needs should also receive that information. So it's also looking at that system that provides education for students with disabilities. Now, there also are support units, different agencies that provide support services for people with disabilities. it's making sure that those organizations, those agencies have high expectations for individuals with disabilities. And so often, if you have a person that lives in a group home or a different type of living arrangement, they need support from staff, that staff understand what their responsibilities are to assist that person in registering to vote. If they move from one group home to the next group home or different living setting, assist them with registering, re-registering to vote, get their voter registration update. Also, if they're receiving mail at the group home, that the group home staff knows that they have an obligation to get that information to that person and assist that person in voting. And also for our election officials, changing the expectations through our election officials. One of the things that happened several years ago when our current Secretary of State was a recorder in Maricopa County. He's a recorder in Maricopa County. He worked with different agencies and coming up with the Young Ambassador Program, which were young persons with disabilities that became deputy register and talk from peer to peer. So when we look at the youth, it's just not looking at the youth, it's looking at this whole system to get them involved in accessing to the electoral process, including, we mentioned earlier, plain language, providing them with expertise about how to use accessible voting machine, what are their options to vote as a voter. Also, a large number of young people with disabilities do not have appropriate ID to register the vote. We don't think about that. If you're going to register the vote, you have to have state issue ID, a driving license, a census card. So it's just working with this whole system to bring in young people so that they are fully included in the electoral process.
Thank you so much for the contributions to that question. Was there others that were interested in, excuse us with the spotlight situation going on over here. There are several people who are doing it. So please remember to add the spotlight and not replace it when we are adding spotlights. All right, so thank you again for everyone's contribution to that question. Let's move on to the next question. The next question is, are you familiar with the cultural taboo issue of not talking about politics among the disability community? This question we will go ahead and throw at David and Melanie.
Thank you very much. A good question. Actually, a very timely question. But reason for taboo, people with disabilities are often felt excluded from the process, political process, leading to a sense of being marginalized, disempowered, and politics don't impact them. Another reason, it could be safety and well-being. So oftentimes, if someone have a different opinion than a person that is caring for them, and they're dependent on that person, they may not be willing to engage in discussion. When it comes to, for example, community dynamics, this diversity can lead to different opinions, different views, discussion that can be divisive. So that's kind of another thing. Next thing is it may seem irrelevant. So, for example, some individuals might feel that political discussion are irrelevant to their daily lives, that doesn't impact them, or that they cannot make a difference. Another thing, for example, is oftentimes overlooked. They seem oftentimes individuals may seem alienated by political conversation, that they don't count. One thing I'm going to say is because of that, some of the implementations of that is that reduced civic engagement. So because of this reason for being not engaged, they their concerns are not heard. Another example is, and we talked about this earlier, is a lack of representation. So by having that, we're underserved, and so a lot of times our needs are maybe not met. What I would say some strategies to assist with that is promoting education and awareness on how the process works. And oftentimes, if you do that, there may be some better outcomes and the community is more engaged in the process. Oftentimes, you can also create some safe spaces. I know it's important that you hear other opinions, but sometimes it's good to have a safe place where people can express their views without feeling that they may feel retaliated against. One other thing I would say is empowering and education. Excuse me, empowering and advocacy. So advocacy, I think, is very important for political engagement and can empower individuals to participate in the process. And the last thing I want to say is you might want to highlight some success stories of people who have done something and people with disabilities who have made a difference in the community. So I think that's another example of how individuals can uh, feel more empowered and being part of the process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David, for bringing those up. And, I think that people will look at the disability community and just think they're not interested in the topic as well. That they may not have an understanding of how the systems work. And then they're not afforded that opportunity to learn how to embrace self-advocacy and how to put it into motion. I mean, you can learn the skills, but then learning how and having access to put those into motion can also be an issue. But politics can be very taboo at the dinner table anyways. And, then you just add all these other layers onto it when you talk about access and unbiased information and accurate information. I mean, we're living in a world where all this information is at your fingertips, but 98% of it might not even be accurate. Or it's just somebody's point of view, and just trying to filter through all of those things and feel like the conversation piece that you're bringing is accurate. And if somebody is talking to you and they have an opposing view, it can get very hostile, and that could shut somebody down and then not want to, explore that again. But I really recommend to individuals that, don't feel completely comfortable in engaging in the voting process, that they reach out to advocacy organizations to find out what resources are out there available to them so that they can feel empowered and feel like they can discuss their political views in a way that would be receptive to others, and that they have the most accurate information that's available.
Thank you, both David and Melody, for contributing to that question. Was there others that wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, this is Jordan Moon. I just want to add something really quickly here. So I think it's important to add to what they were both saying, because both of them were very important. And what you saw there was people with disabilities do want to be, they want to feel like everybody else and discuss these issues, but the environment may not be right, or maybe the politicians aren't willing to engage because of a lack of understanding. I think one of the biggest things to remember and to keep in mind is the disability community is not monolithic, meaning there are a wide variety of diversity amongst us, right? So even amongst blindness, National Federation of the Blind, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is having that diversity, equity, and inclusion be a part of our fabric, right? So it's a really, just like it's hard to talk about politics amongst your work friends and everything like that, it can be hard to talk about it amongst people with disabilities, because we're all fitting in such very different political sectors, right? So I want to make sure like that even though we're talking about disabilities as a whole, we make sure to still appreciate the individualization of us.
Yeah, that was a great comments. Thank you for that, Jordan. Did I see
Tiffany, I
Nikki?
have something to say. Yes.
Okay, I was gonna say, did I see Nikki's hand go up? Go ahead.
Can someone spotlight Nikki? There we go. So Jordan, you made a very important point about the diversity of the disability community and people's personal opinions. I also think that a common connection or a unifier that we experience is that we as people with disabilities will advocate for disability rights. We will talk about politics in terms of disability rights, our rights to advocacy organizations who will engage the community in the process of understanding what our priorities are, what's important to us as a disability community, what we're advocating for at the local and national level. Our agency, for example, I'm a registered lobbyist, and my executive director is also a registered lobbyist. So we will go to the Capitol and we can testify and speak to the rights for people in regards to specific bills and laws, because we know that these bills and laws will impact our community members. So we are there to speak up and not be afraid to share our opinion, but that is typically about how these bills and laws might impact our rights as a person who is deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, or has a disability. I remember for myself, as an example, when I was interning during my bachelor's degree, I worked for the Center for Disability Rights, and they were affiliated with a national organization called ADEPT. And that organization was known for their radical movements. Not violence by any means, but they spoke for the rights of people with disabilities without any hesitation. So for our communities, we have the National Association for the Deaf. That is an advocacy organization that advocates for our deaf community. We have Deaf Seniors of America, who will advocate for the rights of older adults. So we do have those advocacy organizations and those mechanisms. And we can have those discussions within political spheres about our rights.
Melanie, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I did, because Nikki just got me thinking about something. And so, you know, most of us here on this panel, we work for nonprofit organizations. And so we're really limited on our interactions with the individuals that we serve and what we can or cannot say when it comes to politics. And when I think about how educated we are and we know, you know, where those lines are and making sure that we're providing the unbiased information, as it trickles down to caregivers, direct support professionals, if they've just been told over and over and over again, well, you can't talk about politics, you can't talk about politics. And the person that they're supporting is really relying on them to provide them, you know, the information about, you know, the things that they can be involved in their community, whether it's local politics with their city councils or on the state or federal level, that could add that taboo piece to it. because they're afraid they may say something that would get them in trouble, or that they shouldn't be speaking on, or that they might be imprinting their opinion onto the person that they're supporting. And so that could create that barrier as well.
Well, that was a great discussion around that question. So it sounds like there are different perspectives with regard to that question, and it depends on whether or not we're in a professional capacity or not, whether or not we can engage in a truly authentic way with our clients or colleagues or others. But I also heard that what I heard from David was that even in our personal spaces and our personal environments, whether it be a family or in the, at dinner or something, it's, not wanting to create that divisiveness in the household or in amongst, the group. And that makes me think about, how do we have these challenging conversations? How do we normalize the ability to disagree with someone while also still caring about them and appreciating their time and presence and, the times that we get to spend with them? So with that said, Alberto and I do workshops around deliberative dialogue. So if anybody in the room or participants or those who are reviewing this video afterwards want to explore that, kind of practice, how do we have those uncomfortable conversations and how do we have those challenging conversations while still being okay with each other, I think will be helpful and might be helpful as we go forward, especially in the climate that we're in right now. We do have to have those challenging conversations in order to make change. Because what I have found in those experiences is that when people disagree with each other and we bring out all of those different perspectives, it becomes a melting pot, and we can actually make a decision and move forward with something with all of these different perspectives included in the decision-making process. Alberto?
Yeah, I think this is such an important point to emphasize, because it is easier to just not have that uncomfortable conversation if you're worried about creating tension or alienating those that are close to you, your friends or your family, by talking about political issues. And I'm very concerned about the point that David made about people that rely on caregivers and people providing all kinds of support for them. If you don't know where they are ideologically, you may not feel comfortable bringing up or responding to some of those issues with them, or vice versa for the caregiver. I think someone else was talking about that caregivers may feel like they shouldn't talk about these issues, that it might make their client feel uncomfortable or unsafe. I understand that, but it's also really a challenge we have to think about and confront. We know from our research, especially we've done research on youth voter participation and young people's attitudes about voting and political participation. And one of the things that stands out from that research is that young people have told us in different ways that they're much more likely to vote and participate politically in other ways if they have people in their lives, that they're surrounded by people that are having those conversations, that are talking about why voting matters, what specifically is going to be decided in the coming election, who the candidates are and what they represent, what are the questions that voters are being asked to decide. So that's really critical. If you're not around people that are having those conversations and talking about those issues, you're much less likely to participate. And so then it becomes a chicken and egg thing. People that aren't participating aren't represented. And if you're not represented, your issues aren't being addressed. And if your issues aren't being addressed, then you're going to feel unserved by government and by politicians. So I don't know what the answer is, but we have to find ways to create safe spaces and safe models for introducing these topics in our conversations, both informally with the people in our networks, as well as in our organizations. And I saw in the Q&A, one of our participants, Ruthie Goldkorn, rightly points out that nonprofit organizations, 501c3 organizations, not only can engage in public policy advocacy, they really ought to. And some of my previous work in one of my former careers we worked a lot with chambers of commerce, which are associations of businesses and business owners. And that's one of the things that we tried to really get across to chambers and to nonprofit organizations is that so many nonprofits are so worried about endangering their tax exempt status that they don't say anything, they don't do anything to educate their clients or their communities about political issues because they don't want to get in trouble. But in fact, what we used to try and promote through the Association of the Arizona Alliance of Nonprofits is that if you're not educating your community and your clients about public policy that affects them, then you're not doing your job as a nonprofit organization. You're not fulfilling your mission to empower your community and your clients to know what's going on, know how to participate in the process, and be fully represented in those outcomes. So nonprofits can't advocate for candidates. They can't say we like this person or we don't like that person, but they can say you should know that this bill is being considered in the legislature, and here's how it affects people with these kinds of disabilities. Here's how this affects families with young children. Here's how this affects people transitioning out of homelessness. So nonprofits really should step into the advocacy space to inform and educate their communities about political issues and to provide resources and tools so that people can have these conversations with their family members, in their workplaces, with their friends in safe ways and say, hey, did you know there's a ballot question that voters will decide in November that says this and will decide and could affect our lives in this way? So I just wanted to jump in there because it really is all of our job to inform the people around us about things that as they're happening politically at all levels of government, from the local school district, city council, the state legislature, and so forth. We really need to challenge ourselves not to take the easy route and just not have uncomfortable conversations, but try to do those conversations, especially with young people, so that they can start learning how it works in the real world and they can be informed about why it matters and go beyond just the platitudes of it's important to vote, but really get into the nitty-gritty of here's the effect that your vote can have in this coming election next month.
All right. Thank you so much, Alberto, for those comments. So we are going to take a commercial break for just a few seconds because we have one of our panelists who has to take off and won't be able to spend the rest of the time with us. So in true Tiffany fashion, we're going to do a screenshot so that we can have, make sure that this is in the book somewhere. So if all of our panelists, interpreters, and Ava can come off mute, please. On camera. So we can take our screenshot. Jordan, are you with us? Yes. And, I wonder if Amy is there. Well, her picture is there. Amy, are you with us? Yay. Okay, ready? Let me get us ready. All right, ready? 1, 2, cheeseburgers. I don't eat cheeseburgers. I didn't like that one. All right, ready? 1, 1, 2, here we go again. All right, now we all look great. Thank you so much, everyone, for that screenshot. All right, let us get back to our webinar. Now we will take this time to do some question and answer. I do see, we did have a hand that was up in the chat. But if you can go ahead and put your questions and answers into the question and answer portion of the box. And I think it was Kainoa who had your hand up. If you want to give remarks, please just let us know again. So let me go through. Oh, there we go. I'm going to give you a chance to talk. Can you talk?
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh yeah, I was just right before that, I saw the question was kind of the cultural taboo around talking about politics within the group or within the disability community, and just hearing all the different answers. I think one of my favorite quotes is, "We aren't destined to live in quiet times." And I think that's kind of, we've been placed in this role as a person with a disability. I'm a quadruple amputee, specifically. And I think just talking about the diversity within the disability community is really important because it's not, like you said, monolithic, and our opinions vary. And I think for me, the greatest and hardest conversations I've had are at the dinner table with family members, and seeing how my experience can really break down that taboo and, you know, kind of practice with my family in a space of love, so then you can bring it into harder conversations and spaces with people. And so that's just from my own personal experience of starting at the dinner table and then at a coffee with some friends, and then growing in your own personal advocacy so that you feel comfortable moving yourself into a space of larger advocacy. And just hearing all of the incredible speakers just kind of reminded me of that, and wanted to say thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you so much for that comment. We appreciate you. Thank you for also being here. And just an update, I did find out that it's possible that we can add the cart services after to the recording. So Nikki let me know that that is an option. So that is something that we will definitely be doing for the replay. The cart captions will definitely be there. And again, I'm going to apologize because I feel so bad, and we will make sure that this does not happen again. So thank you, everyone. Noah James, we'll let you talk. You have a question or a comment?
Yes, I thank you so much for this webinar today. I'm very thankful for this. I was born with a disability. My whole life I've had it. I'm hard of hearing, and I've also later on was diagnosed with autism. So I'm on the autistic spectrum, and also I have intellectual disabilities. So it took me a long time to get to where I am today. But also with the frustrating thing right now, and I know that people don't like to be in, politics and don't like to talk about this stuff, but this is, we're in a free country, and we have a voice that we can use still in this country. And that's what the beautiful thing about this country is, we can use our voice. And right now, when you sit back, it's not very good for me because as I can see right now, is I'm trying to go into college. I'm also trying to use vocational rehabilitation. And all these barriers are blocking me from being able to succeed in what I want to do. And so, like, I've been trying to go to college, and there's a lot of lack with the accommodations. And this is a big issue for me because I don't understand why in the college I've had my accommodations for so long, in high school, middle school, elementary, and I've had these accommodations for so long, so I know how to adapt to them. But when I go to college, and then the disability offices tell me I can't use the same accommodations that I've had for my whole life, that's concerning for me when you're telling me that, oh, well, we're here for you to succeed in school. So this is a major issue for me as a disabled child my whole life. And I came here from Hawaii because the system in Hawaii was so bad. My mom and dad brought us up here in the system here in Arizona. And so we thought that it was going to be a good system here in Arizona, but it's still lacking. And so now I'm in this situation, which I would love to go to school, but I'm feeling lost because I don't have that kind of help, that support system. So now I'm in politics because I'm trying to get that voice out there because I don't have a place. Like it's very hard. And yeah, so yeah, this is a big concern for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah James, for sharing those comments. Alberto and I work here at Arizona State University, and have connections with our accessibility office here. As a social worker, I definitely have heard some challenges with the vocational rehabilitation services here in Arizona. Does anybody have any comments to add regarding working with vocational rehab here in Arizona?
So Tiffany, this is Ronaldo at Disability Rights. One of the areas that we look at disability rights is access to post-secondary education. That's an option. Contact our office. We also have staff that can assist you if there's a disagreement over your services with vocational rehabilitation. So Disability Rights Arizona, and I can just put the phone number to the office, and he can give a call to the office.
This is David. I'm a client of book rehab, and I've been a client of book rehab over the years. And it's a great program. I think it's allowed me to further my education, get a job, and further my education, get a job, and be self-sufficient throughout my lifespan. So I think that one of the most important things is that you have to be an advocate for yourself. So, I fortunately had some great counselors, and I had some counselors, not as great. But the main thing is you have to know what you need and ask for those needs, because no one's going to know what you need unless you ask. So, but I'm going to go to bat book rehab services. I think it's a great service, and for anyone that has a disability, I would hope you go there to get those services if you need them. Thanks.
Yeah.
This is,
Go ahead.
sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, George.
No, I just wanted to add that, yeah, I agree. Voc Rehab is a great program to help people with disabilities get the training and education that they may need to become employed. It's a great program when it works. And a lot of people with disabilities have found it difficult because of their type of disability. But there are programs within Voc Rehab that can help a person with a disability be able to use the program to meet their vocational goal. For instance, our organization works with Voc Rehab. We have a contract with them to provide supported education services. And what we do is we work with the client, their counselor, and we help them through the whole process of applying or doing the research for the school that they may need to go to, figuring out what they need to do to get employed or to get it accepted into that school. And we help them with their financial resources, whether it's applying for scholarships or Pell Grants, financial aid. And so, working with RSA, we really help that client navigate through the whole system so that they're ready to go on day one in school and are able to really take advantage of what Voc Rehab is allowing them to or giving them so that they're able to meet their financial or meet their vocational goals.
Thank you so much for sharing those success stories with vocational rehab, and also providing some information and resources in the chat as well. Because we are really kind of running out of time here, we're going to go ahead and move on with the questioning. But thank you so much for that very engaging discussion around vocational rehab. Unless Jordan, you were off mute, I didn't want to cut you off. Did you have something to add?
Oh, I was just really going to talk briefly about how there's this thing called consumer choice. So, it kind of goes back to here with the conversation about political engagement. Previously, VR, as far as your counselor and how they worked with you, was based off of a medical model of, hey, you have this type of disability, so you're slated to have this type of role. Now, luckily, it's moved over to a model that is based off of consumer choice and being able to put the power in the hands of the VR consumer which is great. It kind of parallels to what we're talking about here today. So that's the part I was going to mention.
Thank you. Thank you again. Yeah, I think that it's important to expose those growth, right? The growth within the organization, because small, organizations definitely are ran by people. And so that means that sometimes things will not work correctly, like cart services today in this webinar that I still feel bad about. But again, thank you for sharing those success stories with us. So let's go ahead and see if we can get to a couple questions in the chat. Noah James, if you need more assistance or if you'd like to follow up regarding that discussion, after this webinar, we have a booklet that's being created that will have a lot of different information and resources in there as well. So you can reach out to the panelists here after the event. So we have a comment from Ruthie Goldcorn who says, thank you. A comment about Representative Pastor is why they chose to name the new transit hub for Stanton, not Pastor, is disheartening to say the least. So that is a comment. All right, we have a question from an anonymous attendee that says, I wonder how many people with disabilities end up not voting due to experiencing burnout from advocating for access to information to make informed decisions when the time comes to vote. Does any of our panelists have any insight into that?
Tiffany, can I address that issue a little bit? One of the things that the whole issue of burnt out, voters, persons with disability, are kind of an underserved community, like a lot of other underserved communities, African Americans, Native American, Hispanics. Securing your rights is sometimes it's a lifelong, ongoing process and struggle. I think sometimes, I'm just going to say this, people think the ADA was going to be a panacea to all the issues that were resolved that voters or person with disabilities had. The ADA is a tool for people to utilize. And a lot of times the struggle, right or wrong, it's a life struggle with challenges that you have. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I just kind of want to be kind of real clear. Is the struggle is real. Sometimes it's every day for people. Sometimes it's during the election. I just want people to understand. Sometimes you have to take a break and regroup, because this is a journey of changing the system and working with election officials. Sometimes we take 2 or 3 steps forward with some election officials. Other election officials, we take a big step back. So it's an ongoing journey in trying to improve the access to voting. So that's kind of my comment around advocacy work. Try to make some changes.
Thank you so much, Ronaldo. David, I see you off mute, but before we get your comments, for all of our panelists, if you wouldn't mind dropping some of your information in an answer to the Q&A portion, because not all of our attendees are able to see your contributions to the chat. So if you just grab one of those questions and type answer, then they'll be able to see what you're contributing. David?
I was about to respond, but you repeat that question again you had. I want to make sure I respond appropriately.
Yeah, the question was, I wonder how many people with disabilities end up not voting due to experiencing burnout from advocating for access to information to make informed decisions when the time comes to vote.
That's good. That's good, Courtney. I don't have those figures. But one thing I would say is, regardless of disability or not, oftentimes people don't see change is slow, and it may take years. And so, we're in a society where we want things, instantly. So I think doing advocacy over the last many years, I found that a lot of individuals don't know how they got the services. And I think the misinformation they have received, has made them not vote in their own best interest. And so with that said, I think, and I don't know who has those figures, but unfortunately, I would probably say it's quite a few that don't vote. So, and I think the one of the main reason is because oftentimes people don't see change right away. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. I definitely would agree. Being, having a master's in public administration and understanding the bureaucratic process, I mean, it is slow. Things do happen slowly, but we can find comfort in the fact that we're seeing the slow change. So if we're seeing the needle move little by little, that gives us hope, or it can produce hope with the situation. But if it's nothing is happening and things are standing still, then I could definitely understand the frustration for those who are experiencing that. We did have some more questions in the chat. I want to summarize one. Ruthie Goldcorn shared an experience working at the polling center, experiencing a hostile work environment because of their disability, and stated that they tried to get assistance by calling 911, but really didn't get any support in that environment. Does anybody have any suggestions or encouragement to offer with regard to those working at the polling stations who may be living with a disability and are experiencing that type of hostile work environment and not being able to get their needs met? Anyone? Looks like Nikki's over there. Maybe with a question or with a response.
So
No? All right. It looks like George was going to add to that then.
yeah, can you clarify the question? So they were looking for support.
Yeah, they experienced a hostile work environment while working at the polling station, and attempted to get some assistance with a situation that happened while working at the polling station, but felt like they weren't heard. Weren't heard with regard to the challenges that they were experiencing.
Yeah, when it comes to an accessibility issue, you can always file a complaint. Contact your local county recorder's office, since they will be managing the elections in your county. You can always file complaints with the Justice Department, I would imagine. But definitely contact your county recorder's office to let them know about the accessibility issues that you are facing, because they're the ones that are going to be responsible for making sure that your local elections polling places is accessible and meeting the needs of people with disabilities. And I do believe Disability Rights Arizona also has a hotline that you can call, that they do have open on election days. And you can also contact them about any voting issues that you do experience.
All right. Well, thank you for contributing to that question, George. So it is 1:10. We are nearing the end of our webinar. So we have come to the part where our panelists will give their final thoughts. So panelists, do we have someone who wants to start first? Ronaldo?
Tiffany, one of the things I want to say again is, when we look at this whole process, and one of the things that the group, my partners, the Arizona Disability Voter Coalition Group, our stakeholders that we worked hard in Arizona for I think probably the last 10 years with our election officials, is to really make some changes to the access to the electoral process. It's a slow process. Elections come and they go. Poll workers change, come and go. We're working with them on poll worker training. Nikki with the Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, they work with election officials. This is a Herculean task to make the system work for all people with disabilities. And I have no illusion. It's work, it's continued work. When will it ever be done? I don't know if it ever will be done. But I think what we have to do as a disability community is to realize there are some accomplishments that we've made in Arizona, and there are some challenges that we really have in Arizona. And so one of the things that I just wanted to say this, that during the pandemic, the Arizona Disability Voter Coalition, our partners, we worked really hard in Arizona to make sure that during the pandemic that Arizona and especially Maricopa County expanded voting opportunities for people with disabilities. And so this is going to be an ongoing challenge for us. And so I just want to kind of leave that to everyone, is that we are in the process of preparing for the 2024 election. And so I think you need to be educated, be aware, be proactive, have a voting plan, and just kind of look out. We're going to be doing some great activities to help out with, with our election officials and doing some voter education. So that's kind of what I want to say. And I said the struggle is real and it will continue.
This is David. I want to say thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel today. What I would say is definitely, your voice is valued and you should be part of voting process. If you are someone living in Arizona, I would suggest that you can vote by mail, and in some cases you can retract your ballot depending on what county you live in. But it's pretty easy process to vote by mail. And I lost my another thing I want to say. Oh, but and if you have any questions, please get in contact with us. As over the next several months, we'll be having some seminars and presentations to keep you engaged in the process. So I can be reached at I guess I could actually, I'm not sure where to put can I put my email in the chat? Okay.
Yeah, I can put it in there for you, David. You want me
Okay,
to
sounds
push?
good. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you have questions or want to be part of our listserv, that way you'll get the information. So you be part of the process. Once again, thank you very much and have a good day.
I think what I would like to add is that, well, it's a two-part thing. One is, if you're a person with a disability, yes, as Ronaldo said, the struggle is real, but the payoff is great. I mean, just continue to advocate for yourself, advocate for others, continue to fight for your rights so that you are able to exercise your vote. I think that the more we as a people with disabilities speak up, and our legislators know that we are a united voice when it comes to disability rights, on all aspects and all types of disabilities, not just our own, that our needs are going to get addressed more. And it's going to become a topic that's going to be discussed just as well as other topics are discussed in the public realm, instead of being something that's just a mandatory thing that they post on their website without really giving it a second thought. When it comes to family members who have a person with a disability, especially those with family members with intellectual disabilities, don't discount them. I think that's an important thing that we need to take away from this. There are things like supported decision making where you can work with an individual to help them understand what are the political issues being discussed in a way that they understand it. And I've worked with a lot of people with disabilities, a lot of people with intellectual disabilities, and they're just as interested in exercising the right to vote as any other person is. But with the right supports, they're able to do that. And it shouldn't be a taboo subject, or they shouldn't be discounted as thinking, well, this is, above them and too difficult to even try to explain. So let's just keep things simple. So it's better to keep people involved and make sure that they're able to exercise their right to speak up for themselves.
Yes, I would agree with that as well, and just emphasize the importance of that engagement and having information that's accessible, accessible in a way that people can understand what the issues are. As an example, for this election, who are the candidates? What are we voting for? What are the issues that can be supported? And I just wanted to share a few things as well that we at ACDHH have been partnering with the Arizona Clean Election Commission. And we've been working with them to provide information about the elections in American Sign Language, and also having that with voiceover and captions so that it's fully accessible on YouTube. There's actually a whole channel for it, and I'll go ahead and put that channel in the chat as well. There's a playlist of all of the current candidates who are running for the primary elections. So it has all the information, and there's the last day for the mail-in ballots, and that's on July 23rd. And that's for those primary elections on July 30th. So just a little a little reminder there on those dates. But if you look at the Clean Elections site, you'll also see all of the information they have available is also accessible in Spanish. So for people who are bilingual as well, that might be a great resource for people to use. Also, all of the live political debates, those have also been provided. There's access provided in ASL and the general elections, and they'll have CART as well for those debates for the general elections as well. I think Ronaldo had already mentioned, and I think maybe George as well had mentioned, that it's a continual fight for advocating for ourselves and getting access to resources and information so that all people with disabilities can actively participate in an equitable way in the political process, as engaged in that civil discourse. And then just one last thing I wanted to mention, with kind of has two parts. We talked about issues with elections and accessible polling, and we do have access with a deaf citizen who was not able to access basically communication as a poll worker. And I just wanted to mention that if you need to file a complaint, that can be done with the county, or also the Attorney General's office, whether it be local in Arizona or federally the Department of Justice. They have a disability rights division, the civil rights division, that you can file a complaint with if necessary, if you face any of those accessibility issues. So those are just a few other resources that are available.
So one of the things that we found at the ARC that is the most impactful method of communication is sharing your story. And so when you see organizations like all of ours reaching out and asking for those stories and those lived experiences, part of that self-advocacy component and is being able to be comfortable in sharing your story in an impactful way. So take advantage of those platforms and make sure you're engaging with any of the coalitions that are going on throughout the state and throughout the nation, educating yourself as much as possible about the issues. And if you come up with a creative solution for a barrier that you've experienced, that is a great moment to then mobilize a team and finding a legislator that would be willing to, write a policy or introduce a bill on the topic and let's get some of those solutions going forward. I think a lot of times we always focus on all the things bad that have happened, but when we find those solutions, that's how we can really get that needle moving in a more positive direction in this field and in this space. And just know that all of us here as advocates, we're here for you, and that's our job and our passion, and feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, I think first of all, this is Jordan Moon, and I want to say it is an honor to be a part of this panel, especially considering I'm a fellow Sun Devil. So forks up, and thank you very much. And I would agree with what was just said. Please, make sure that you educate yourself on what you, as someone with a disability, can do to further the cause, but also make sure that you're educate that folks who want to maybe increase voter turnout or something, or engage with the disability community, engage themselves on the actual needs of the disability community. So that means not being afraid to attend meetings or maybe take tours of places like Savvy or ACDHH and places around that really help spread the message. I just want to bring light really quickly to some of the issues that I wasn't able to speak on, but I wanted to just make those listening to this aware of. Ronaldo mentioned a Herculean effect. Sometimes it feels like when people with disabilities want to participate in the voting process or the election process in general, that they are having to constantly climb like this mountain, right, in order to have this equal access. So one of the main examples of this is, I know whenever I go to an actual polling place, I have high anxiety, just like a lot of other blind people, or people who need to use the voting machines, that these machines are not going to work. They just may or may not work. And under the Help America Vote Act, which was passed in 2002, it does provide funding, education, support, and standards so that every polling place needs to have an accessible voting machine, or at least a machine that is capable of being accessible. Half the time, poll workers don't know how to activate those machines. I know Ronaldo and other folks on this panel, I have had the pleasure of working with on the Disability Voter Coalition, to make sure that we provide education opportunities for our elected officials on how to educate those poll workers on the machines. Another big barrier, unfortunately, is vote by mail balloting. And I want to just bring attention to, when somebody who's blind or dyslexic, or has low vision, wants to vote by mail, it is virtually impossible. There are braille ballots, there's large print ballots and other methods. There's people who can come to your home and maybe do you get two party officials to come. There's ways, but it's not truly independent, because at some point the ballot needs to be transcribed or transplanted into another form, or put into the mailbox, and signed by me or whoever can't see it, and that isn't an accessible process. So the National Federation of the Blind of Arizona has been very much advocating for accessible online voting. Right now, the military has a law that allows them to vote absentee if they can vote online, and that's what we are trying to advocate for in Arizona. So that's a really big push. I've been working again with a lot of people on that part of it. So I'd love to talk more about that push with anyone who like. I can put my info in the chat. The last thing I would say is, it really just starts with you having respect for yourself as someone with a disability, understanding that it is respectable to have a disability, right? And so because of that, should motivate you to get your voice heard, to fight for these rights, and to continue, even though it's a slow process, to move forward. Martin Luther King said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And everybody has a life, and we shouldn't want it to be silent.
Well, Jordan, That was a very good way to close us out with panelists' final thoughts. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for contributing to this discussion. It was powerful and it was eye-opening for me as well. There are several things that I heard from the panelists, but what I really am left with is the strength and the power in all of you and the advocacy that is within all of you and the passion that you have for this community. So I am so grateful and honored to have moderated this conversation today, this discussion today. Although we did not get to many of the meats and bones of what this community is experiencing, that just means that we need to do this again. So thank you so much. Also, there are some hidden disabilities that weren't exposed through this conversation, which I think are extremely important because there are more of us who have hidden disabilities than those of us who don't. So I think that it's very powerful that we also expose that within the community as well. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for participating in this discussion. I do want to lend time to Alberto if he would like to add any final comments to the discussion. But again, thank you so much for your participation in this event. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Thank you to our attendees who made it all the way to the end of the webinar. We are so grateful for you. And thank you so much for spending your lunch brunch hour with us.
Thanks, Tiffany. Not much to add, just sincere appreciation to our really amazing panel, and especially to Ronaldo Fowler, who really was pivotal in advising us on how to put this event together and connecting us with many of the panelists, as he did last year for our inaugural version of this discussion. So Ronaldo is one of our favorites. We should have a little plaque for him somewhere in our office, but I really can't thank you enough, Ronaldo, and all of the panelists for spending your time with us and your wisdom and your experience. We always learn a lot by having these conversations. And as Ronaldo mentioned earlier, this is an ongoing effort. We're never going to be done with these efforts, but we learn and we grow and we become smarter about how we advocate for these interests. But it starts with all of us seeing that it's our job, all of us. It's every one of us have the job to speak up, speak truth to power, to tell our stories, and to involve ourselves in these processes that affect us. Because there's that old political saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, and that certainly affects all of us. So it's on all of us. And I think today's conversation has been incredibly inspiring and helpful. And do look for the resource guide that Tiffany's going to be sending out to everyone that registered, because it's chock full of really terrific resources, including information about all the organizations that our panelists represent. So thanks so much, and we look forward to the next version of this conversation coming up again next year. Thanks, everybody.
One last comment. So as Alberto, I forgot to mention this, our last disabilities perspective discussion was in person. And so this is our first time doing this perspective as a webinar. We considered doing it in person again because I foresaw the dang cart services mishap throughout this experience. But so thank you for being here for our very first disabilities perspective webinar experience, and we will definitely make sure we are more accessible going forward. So as Alberto said, thank you everyone for spending your time with us. We will see you soon. Be on the lookout of your inboxes for that booklet and other information as well.
Sounds good. Have a good one. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.